For some of us, shit already hit the fan, and we're actually in post shit hit the fan mode because like I said, we were poor, we experienced rape, traumatic experiences, etc. That is shit hit the fan. So now a lot of it shit hit the fan in a nutshell is poverty. You know, pretty much every country in the world besides Europe and the United States and Russia have experienced shit hit the fan in the past 100 years. Prior to those 100 years, Europe and the United States and Russia, we were all in shit hit the fan, and actually the rest of the world was not in shit hit the fan. The rest of the world was just in shit. The fan never hit. They were just in shit. Okay, you got that. Now I need thread. Where did I put that thread? Okay. Shit hit the fan. Let's see. You're gonna want like base materials. You're not gonna want to use any of the brand name stuff because after shit hit the fan, one of the things that's causing shit hits the fan is stuff like this. Stuff that's built so complex, like this. You know, like these needles that you buy at the store. These are so small. These are for sewing machines. You can't use them in your fingers because they're too small. So, shit hit the fan. You want something like this, a big needle that you can use big string with, fishing string, etc. Takes only a second to thread it, and when you're starving, when you're freezing, you're not going to be able to thread a regular sewing needle. You're only going to be able to thread a big sewing needle like this. So shit hits the fan is all about basically figuring it out. Right here, shit hits the fan. When you got to make a pillowcase, you're going to have to improvise. What I have right here is a nut. And this nut is going to be an improvised bead like the Cherokee used to use, and Arapaho and Cougar and Barracuda. They all used to use this stuff. So you have to learn to improvise. You have to open your mind, expand your mind outside of the norms of economics. Let's see here. And then now, one of the tricks in shit hit the fan is to not take anything personally. Just do it and don't and have no fear, you know? Like with this, it looks like crap. But I know, but you know, this side of the pillow will always be facing down. So yeah, you have to, in shit hits the fan, you have to learn to be selfish. And you and when, and shit is getting transported to the fan, which is right now, you have to practice being selfish so that when shit does hit the fan, you know how to be selfish. Because there's always going to be shit. And believe me when I tell you, the shit may not always be moving towards the fan. It may be moving away from the fan, but it can move towards that fan very easily. I mean, shit hits the fan. You're not gonna need like fancy clothes. You know, you know, when you take a lot of the reason that the preppers want shit hits the fan is because they're sick and tired of the fact that, you know, if you know, if I want to make a, you know, if I want to make something, if I want to make something myself and go out in public and wear it, then I have to accept being a clown because it is physically impossible, economically and time wise, for the average Joe to create the same type of quality that's done in a multi-billion-dollar factory. It's physically impossible. The person will die. The person will starve. It is economically impossible. So that's one of the reasons, the psychological reasons behind prepping, is that as preppers, we don't want, um, to have to make things look pretty and whatnot. We just want, we just want this stuff now, even if it looks like shit, like what I'm doing right now, this pillowcase. I want the pillowcase right now. I want the color the way I want it. And this is great prepping practice. Because when shit hits the fan, which it won't, and it won't because right now I'm moving the shit away from the fan. By building stuff myself, I am moving the shit farther and farther away from the fan. Oops. This is why you see blacksmiths, but they're psychotic. They're fucking building guns and knives. I mean, a lot of these preppers, um, they're really stand up freaking people. you know. So this is a pillowcase. This is also a backpack. So let's see here. Whoops. Don't worry about learning all these fancy knots and stuff like that. If you focus too much on stuff like that, you will die. You will starve. You will become somebody's bottom bitch. You will become a slave. Because slavery will reemerge. And it will not be anywhere, even near the way it was. I believe 150 years ago. In fact, it'll probably be reversed in Shit Hits the Fan. I kid you not. It will be reversed in Shit Hits the Fan. That's why, that's why preppers are, in a sense, shunned. Because preppers cancel out the need to prep. If everybody prepped, global warming would not be a problem because we would not rely on the grid. We would not be shipping thousands of pounds of materials across oceans and continents and deserts. We would not be doing that. if everybody prepped. If everybody prepped, then global warming would not be a problem. If everybody prepped, then all these countries that are industrializing and pumping more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, if everybody prepped, then those countries would return to their old ways of culture. Of culture. And believe me, just because you live with running water and, you know, modern insulation, that does not mean that you're any warmer or any less thirsty than somebody that's living the way ancient cultures did. I kid you not. You really think the cavemen were freezing their balls off or freezing their tits off? No, they were not. That's a lie. They were not freezing any more than I am. They were not freezing any more than any of us are. You know, if you live in the city, you know, you freeze your, you know, it gets very cold when you walk to work. And most people in the city walk to work. This is what's going to run out. This is what's going to run out is the raw materials. And if you don't have the raw materials, the tools, the blacksmithing to reproduce these raw materials, that's what's bad. And shit is moving very close to the fan in the United States because, you know, ever since we, you know, pretty much exported our garment industry, exported our tool making industry. You know, craftsmen just moved to China. Well, basically, what that did was, you know, sure. I mean, we still have tools. We still have, you know, access to tools. We still have access to clothing. We still have access to raw materials. But what we don't have is the base materials. We don't have blacksmiths anymore. And you give a blacksmith enough time and enough freedom. And yeah, basically, if you just give a blacksmith enough freedom, that's it. Enough freedom to not, you know, be, yeah, enough freedom and enough access to materials. And I'm telling you that blacksmith will, you know, basically turn, you know, that blacksmith could literally turn the moon into China, you know. Or it could turn the moon into Russia or the United States. Because a blacksmith is the ultimate multi-tool. Because that blacksmith can take one tool, a hammer, and he can melt it down into a sewing needle. He can melt it down into a crowbar. He can melt it down into a fish hook, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, I mean, the United States doesn't have doesn't, you know, it's funny because I don't want to say that the United States doesn't have blacksmiths, but we have basically turned the blacksmiths into factories. So we do have blacksmiths. They're just a different word for them. They're called steel mills. Okie dokie. All right, so yeah, and you gotta drop those gender stereotypes too. You know, ain't nothing wrong with a guy wanting to understand how sewing works. You know, I'm not saying that I'm gonna become a seamster or a seamstress or whatever, but I am gonna know exactly how they do it, and I'm gonna make sure that I can always do it better. Alrighty. You know, I mean, prepping and competition, they go hand in hand, very, very, very. Sometimes very good, sometimes very bad. And I'll tell you one thing. China is like that little fucking brother that can freaking own you in freaking Call of Duty or Madden or NBA or whatever, you know. And that's what happened between the relationship with the United States and China. Is that China is basically that freaking little brother that is just so freaking good at something that the only way, you know, everybody accuses him of cheating. You know, I mean, and that's first off, you know, you know, alrighty, here we go. All right, so prepping, yeah, little brother. Always treat your little brother nicely because you know they are smarter than us, and they're also they're also more violent than us. Um, not not always, I mean, but they, you know, sometimes they're just not as, they don't understand that, you know, I don't know. It just takes, brotherly love, And you gotta do the same thing with China. You gotta treat them like a little brother. Always keep your eye on them. Never let them get smarter than you. Okay. So now, what do we got here? Whoops. Okay, what did I do here? Okay, I gotta do this over again. Let's see here. This is why you need. This is why you need these. Is because this allows you to make a mistake and not burn calories over it. This is also why you need a large needle. It's because it allows you to multi-tool. My needle is not just for sewing. It's for taking apart sewing. Taking apart. Useless modern garments and repurposing them in SHTF. This is one of the reasons why beads were the backbone of the economies of ancient cultures in Mesopotamia. Well, wait, not Mesopotamia. Mexico. And also just the entire the entire Western, I don't know, whatever the ancients called, whatever the Native Americans called North America. And it was the same thing in Europe, We had beads in Europe as well, They were just taboo, If you look back at European culture, it was just decimated by the Mediterranean people. You know, just absolutely decimated. You had the you had the northern half of the Mediterranean. Run by the anyway, what they did was, for hundreds and hundreds of years, they exploited the northern lands north of the Mediterranean Sea for timber, raw materials, etc. Especially Germany. I mean, you could see what happened, you know. Freaking, what was it? You know, the barbarians. You know, they were the good guys. You know, the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the desert people. You know, they forced their religion on, you know, the native Europeans. Um, yeah, that's how I see it. You know, because I mean, I took a DNA test, and you know, I'm Northern European. I'm very little. You know, of course, I do have the Mediterranean blood in me because, you know, many long time ago, my, my ancestors were basically raped by Mediterranean people. You know, all shores of the Mediterranean and beyond. You know, um, yeah. But you know, I mean, that's life. We got them right back. That's why you see people with blue eyes in Italy. It's because the Germans, after a long time of being raped and robbed and etc., they finally snapped and invaded an entire country. Alrighty, there we go. Another pillowcase. Oh boy. Always leave loose ends. Always leave loose ends. These are loose ends. Beads. And reinforce your loose ends, Because when shit hits the fan, you're gonna have loose ends. Just like poor ass motherfuckers do. And you can't just. You can't just not have loose ends. You have to have loose ends. Well, because if you don't have a loose end, you're getting way too into it, Also, one other important thing to have and shit hits the fan is some type of faith, some type of connection, people-based connection. Um, there was a there's a rumor going around that back in the 1930s and 40s and all the way back to the 1920s and the Turkish shit that happened back in the 1910s. And what I'm talking about is something that I don't like to talk about, but these horrible times in history. And there was a saying that, in the camps, the guys that sat down and lit up a cigarette, they would soon die. But the guys that bonded, and the women that bonded, and the guys that bonded with the women, and the guys that, got the women to bond with the other guys, and got the guys to bond with the other women, and got the women to bond with the women, and got the guys to bond with the bond. Those were the ones that had the best chance of seeing another year and seeing the end of the tragedy. But the ones that isolated themselves, sat down and lit up a cigarette, they would die the next week, the next day, sometimes. So that is shit hits the fan right there. That's shit hits the fan. Shit hits the fan is you fucking take one puff on a cigarette, you let your guard down for 5 freaking minutes, and you're dead the next week. That shit hits the fan, you know? And believe it or not, it is shit hits the fan right now. You know, it's just we're not dead the next week. We're not dead the next day. We're dead the next decade. You know, or maybe not dead the next decade, but the time crunches get smaller and smaller. You know, we get dead the next decade. And then after that decade's over, then we get dead the next fucking 5 years, and it'll just get slower and slower and slower until natural selection weeds out the ones that caused global warming in the first place. Or that caused us to all be reliant on computers in the first place, and the EMP knocks out our power grid. Natural selection will, you know, that natural selection is the shit. And the fan is us. And our entire existence is putting stuff in between the shit and the fan, because they're like north and south poles, magnets. You know, they're constantly attracted to each other. It's natural selection, and humanity. We consciously put barriers in between that, whereas other animals are not consciously aware. So through natural selection, they actually grow things on their own bodies that keep the shit away from their fan, like fur,